And I'd like to welcome you to the Braver Angels Film Club discussion of the documentary Trustworthy. I'm Donna Murphy, and I'm joined by fellow film club leaders Ivan Kason, Ron McFarland, and Molly Zeff. So let's start with a few ground rules. We ask that you take turns, not interrupt others, listen to everyone, open up space for quieter group members, and be respectful. In other words, we bring our best selves to this discussion. During the discussion, if you'd like to speak, please raise your electronic hand. You should see it at the bottom of your screen and click on it to raise it. Given the number of people on tonight's call, we ask that you speak no longer than 2 minutes, and we might not be able to call on everyone who wants to ask or answer a question. Here's our agenda for the evening. We are thrilled to have with us this evening Trustworthy's executive producer, Stephanie Zamora. For the first 10 to 15 minutes, film club leaders will ask Stephanie questions about the documentary. After that, it's your turn to ask Stephanie questions. Then, during the remainder of the event, we will ask you questions about Trustworthy and look forward to hearing what you thought about it. So let's start with an introduction of Stephanie Zamora. Stephanie is a California native, a finance and systems veteran in technology startups. In response to January 6th, a call to action and fate teamed Stephanie up with director Dana Ritchie and talent executive Denise Kwan to create Trustworthy. Even though Stephanie had no film experience, she leveraged all of her entrepreneurial spirit to just make it happen. Stephanie shares Trustworthy in hopes of inspiring individuals and communities across America to get involved and be part of the solution to strengthen our democracy. So welcome everyone, and especially welcome Stephanie. Okay, so now we're going to start by asking you questions, and Ivan is going to start us off. Go for it, Ivan.
Yes, thanks. We'll start with the opening question. Stephanie, what is the difference between journalism and the media?
Yeah, I think in this day and age, it's getting to be a lot more confusing because there's a lot of opinions out there. But I think we need to remember that journalism is a profession that has, education, standards around it. Media is more of kind of a giant, catchphrase for a lot of different kinds of platforms, a lot of kind of different kinds of entertainment, if you will, a lot of different sources of information. So, the younger generations who didn't grow up with, Cronkite and Dan Rather, I've had one person even tell me they didn't know that news is supposed to be unbiased. So just really understanding then that the source of the information, and, like all professions, there's awesome journalists and there's not so awesome journalists, but at least if you start in the profession, you want to, go to trained sources for the kind of information that you need.
Right. So why did you decide to make the film? And how did you gather the team together to make it, and the kind of obstacles that you had to encounter and overcome?
So as Donna said in my introduction, I just felt a call to action when I saw what happened on January 6th. I was wondering what was causing all of the difference in opinion over what was happening in our country. And then met up with Dana, who had done a documentary. And so just decided, let's find out, let's get to the bottom of this. How do people really feel? Who wants to say on this, who wants to say something on this topic? So we started just getting on Zoom calls during the summer of 2021. And then by the end of the summer, we realized, okay, well, so how are we going to interview everybody? And one of the big obstacles was that we were still pretty heavy in COVID. And so how are we going to travel? How are we going to get, what I really thought was important was the voices of the people, just as much as the subject matter experts really wanted the voices of the people, which were just random along the way. So, again, I've been in a lot of startups. I know how to take, go from nothing to something. This is just another nothing to something that I did. And, you meet someone, they know someone, they know someone, they know someone, and you just work it and make it happen.
That's amazing. That sounds like a whole lot of work. I'll turn over the moderating duties to Donna now.
Thank you, Ivan. There's a question in the chat box. Will the documentary continue to be available through BA? And it will not. But Stephanie, is there some other way that people will be able to share, tell other people to watch Trustworthy and some type of link?
Yeah, I do expect it out on a distribution platform in early next year, probably early March. If someone really, really wants to watch it, they can email me and I will make it available because I do want as many people to see it as possible. So, I'm happy to continue to grant it on a one-off basis for anybody who wants to reach out.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. And we will make sure that your email address is in the chat box.
Yeah, and it's like usually like the only thing I ask if someone wants to watch it, that they just at least give me some feedback on it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so here's another question. You worked hard to avoid making this simply a film containing talking heads. It includes art created specifically for this film, an excellent soundtrack, and iconic images, including a kite shaped like a red, white, and blue eagle. Can you talk a bit about the creative choices made by those who worked on the film?
Yeah, and this was interesting because we had some, Dana and I were the main creators of the film in terms of the tone and what we wanted to communicate. And we did get a lot of pressure to make it more, grr, and we just didn't want to go there. So, we committed to having it be non-incendiary. We wanted it to be as, compassionate, just some other emotions that we didn't see in other documentaries, compassion, humanity, respect. We just really wanted to bring out those kinds of qualities in the film. The art is all AI. The day that Dolly was kind of released to the public, we jumped on that because we're looking for some way to, people would say, oh, you have to have, Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow side by side. And it's just like, no, I don't want to, pick on any particular journalist, but having kind of the art to say, here's a red TV and a blue TV, then everybody can kind of fill in their own blank for what they feel that is. So we were able to, it was interesting to see what Dolly was doing with the requests they were making about, disinformation or, losing our democracy. And so, that was really the work of Dolly.
Wow.
And then for me, the music was always a really important part. I did allocate a really generous music budget because the music really sets the tone. And we wanted to make sure the most important thing for us at this documentary was to get to people's hearts.
Well, the music certainly accomplished that. I'm kind of curious, what does it cost to be able to put a piece of music into a film?
So there's a few songs that we had to license directly from the artists. Those range anywhere from, $5K to $30K. And then there's a lot of songs that we got from a library, which you kind of just pay a fee. And then you can have access to so many songs from the library.
Wow, 5K to 30K for some songs. So that's amazing.
Yeah, the Rise Up was actually a cover. It sounds almost exactly like the original artist, but it is a cover because that one was way out of my budget.
Yeah, that's understandable. Okay, here's another question for you. Can you share a story about making this film that only someone behind the scenes would know?
I'm going to give you a couple things. So one thing that I wanted to really, emphasize, like we all got on this bus. Even me and the director had just met each other that year. We didn't meet each other in person until about a month before we were about to get on the bus. A lot of people had lost people, during COVID. A lot of people lost people during the bus trip. But I was just always really inspired that we just, what we were doing was really important to get it done. So that's just a story I like to share that, we were all dealing with losses, either just coming off of COVID or, like I said, even during the bus trip. And so that made it, it added an element that you don't always have to deal with, on a set. The other thing I wanted to share is that someone asked me one time, is there any footage that we have that we wouldn't have been able to put in the film because it was kind of outside of our what we wanted to achieve? And the answer is absolutely not a single sentence. So, I could have made 3 hours of the same kind of messaging about hope and inspiration, and we have to love each other. But even an hour and 45 minutes of it was kind of repetitive. The first cut we had about an hour, 45 minutes. But there wasn't anything that we couldn't put in the film if we wanted to.
Mhm, mhm. Very good. Okay, over to Ivan for the next question.
All right, thanks. Um, by the way, I endorse, Stephanie, your judgment that we shouldn't make the film incendiary, given that it started off from January 6th. It's incendiary enough.
Right.
Can you? I think we can all agree that there is such a need for more trust, but how should trust in the news media be regained? Who or what is best positioned to lead that kind of an effort?
So honestly, the consumer is always that person, and that consumer is all of us. And so, where we put our finger, so to speak, what we, demand from our service providers and our product providers, when there's enough of us, it usually gets done. So, that's the main thing, is that, do we have the power? I think people feel a little bit overwhelmed and helpless at times because it just feels like it's so overwhelming. But actually, everything that's going on, we have a lot of power within ourselves to solve this. It's just that, oh, well, do other people feel like me? And, sort of, events like this where you see that there's so many people that want to find a way to connect and want to find a way to solve this problem. We can go and demand that of our service providers or our content providers, or
Hmm.
we move away from that completely, and I guarantee you it will change.
Right, right. Okay, I'll turn it over to Ron now.
All right, Stephanie. Great answers. Man, I learned a few things. Usually I don't. No, I'm just joking. My question has to do with the regions that you went through. What do you think about the media? Hold on. As you went across the regions, and did you find different opinions emerge about trust and the news media? And how about urban versus rural? Uh, did you see any things that stuck out or differences?
So, most people felt like they couldn't trust the media, but we were very, we didn't really want to put anybody on the spot in
Okay.
terms of, or we always wanted them to share what they wanted to share. So when you say that you couldn't trust the media, you were never quite sure what media they were talking about, right? Like their own or the other one, right?
Okay.
But that
Okay.
seems to be pretty universal. What I was really moved by in the different regions is that everybody did really feel the same, though, about just sad. They were just
Okay.
sad about where we are.
Okay.
And even though both sides are feeling like they're losing something that's important to them, and we never really sure which side they meant, they just really felt sad that this is where we are as a country. And a lot of people didn't grow up in a country like that. We grew up in a much more, prosperous country. And so to see where we are right now is it's sad.
Hmm. That's pretty good, because I thought maybe it might be a southern or northern difference, but you didn't see much of that. So that
Yeah, and we
good.
kind of went, down this way along the bottom part of the country and then up
Okay.
the seaboard.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very small portion of the population, but we definitely got southern representation. We definitely have the West
Mhm.
Coast representation.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit of everything. But
Okay. So it did it, I'm probably going too far with this question, but what about racially? Did you see any differences did you come across people of color or that had different perspectives on the media or anything like that?
again, same kinds of things. Don't know what to trust. It's confusing.
Mhm.
Want to trust. I think everyone's really in the same boat this
Okay.
way.
Okay.
And we couldn't find anyone who said, oh yeah, everything's fine. You guys are exaggerating, right? Like no one said that.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, this next question has to do with the media might focus on a word or a phrase, uh, just one thing a political person they don't like. and like maybe just a single word, I already said that, instead of really getting into the important topic or the stuff. For example, they might highlight a small part of a speech without talking about the main ideas that the person was sharing. What do you think about that? You know,
Yeah, it's hard because the things that are happening in our country right now, they're so layered and there's so many dimensions. It is really hard to cover all aspects of what would need to be, to really flush out a topic, especially if you're spending half of it like just name calling or whatever, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so that's where it's kind of incumbent upon us as news consumers to, if there's some gaps that need to be filled in, then that should be filled in. And even, I like to fill that in with documentaries myself, because that seems to be a really dense way to get a piece of history about, like, something will come up. It's like, well, what's a documentary about that? Let me get a little more information on that. I think not only do we have to be better news consumers, where we are right now, I think we have to become, historians. We have to kind of find out really what has this whole situation on January 6th did not happen overnight. So what are all of the factors that leading up to it? Not just who was president, before, but really what is at the root of some of this division? Because you find out that it's all pretty legit. We just don't have the same agreement on how to get it solved.
So when you say gaps, you mean like different media perspectives? Is that what you're saying, or because you said documentary? Okay.
Yeah, because it's hard for any one news journalist or even a influencer who's expressing an opinion to really cover all aspects of some of the topics that are going on right now. Right. So you got to kind of fill in the blanks yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't cover in a question that Stephanie has burning in her, want to say? And if you don't, well, I'll move it on to Ivan to get with the start with the audience participation.
Let's go ahead and go with the audience.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. It's Molly. I will actually be, at least for now, handling questions from the audience for Stephanie.
Oh, yeah. I forgot, Molly. Sorry.
So I saw one I'm going to flag. Thank you, Donna, for passing that on, from Trudy Josephson. How was this wonderful documentary funded?
That was from me.
Oh, that was from you. Okay. Got it. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just saw that passed on. Let's see then. We're going to go to Steve. Steve, take us away. And then Chris, you're next.
Yeah, my question was about one of the big divides I see currently in the information marketplace is the difference between institutional voices and independent journalists, and the idea that in American history there's been a strong movement of independent journalists becoming the next generation of institutional journalists, like Ben Franklin, Thomas Paine, those kinds of guys. I didn't see a lot of handling of the role of independent journalism, and how do independent journalists become kind of approved sources in the current media marketplace, where it seems that the independent voices are less trusted by the institution, and the people don't trust the institution. Does that make sense?
So I would say probably the closest person we had to independent would be Rochelle Ritchie. It is hard to, there's a lot of barriers to entry to be a journalist without that institution behind you. I do agree that independent journalists have a big role, and then there is more technology available to the independent journalists to get that placement. I think they have to do the same thing that everybody else does, which is they have to be able to compete on social media. They have to be able to kind of develop a following. And then, I think the main thing is that how do you really cover things with the most highest journalistic standards? And it's kind of a catch-22, because, that sensationalism, our addiction to sensationalism, or our addiction to whatever, is kind of in our own way of just getting to just raw news. And so I think if that hurdle can be traversed, then independent journalists would probably be a little more successful because people would recognize that the news is just what it is. It's not quite so biased or opinionated. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I think I'm next. My question is, given the disparities in the use patterns of social media and news sources of media dependent on age, who are you more worried about in terms of age groups, um, in terms of susceptibility to misinformation?
Yeah, and there's a lot of urgency, not only in my mind, but with a lot of other people that I talk to, because the youth is kind of being attacked at an age before their brains are even fully developed. And this kind of, addiction to the screen, it doesn't exercise the critical thinking skills that are necessary to discern good information from bad information. So, I'm doing a lot of university tours. I'm doing a lot of work with the high schools. I'm working with a lot of organizations that are involved with, or not a lot, let's just say, a couple here, a couple there, that are involved with media literacy, like MediaWise at the Poynter Institute. And the other thing about the youth is that they kind of, if you look back at their last 6 or 7 years, it's been pretty rough. There was a lot of upheaval. There was then a pandemic, and now we're talking about our democracy being threatened. That's a lot for a high schooler to take in. And so for them to never even maybe at this point know what the good life is, that's really tragic. And that's on us to resolve.
Thank you. And now, Ross, you are up.
All right,
I
thank you.
was up.
Thank you for putting this on. Thank you for being here, Stephanie, and producing Trustworthy. I watched it over a couple of days, taking notes, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
The word truth is spoken by many of of the people you feature in the documentary. For example, Andy Toucher, is that how her name is pronounced?
Andy Tucker.
Okay. Not knowing what the truth is terribly dangerous for our democracy. So, as a news consumer and a concerned citizen, I want to ask, how do I know when I'm done? That is, when I found the truth about any particular newsworthy event and can now act on it in ways that have the potential of affecting the well-being of others. And if you want to make this more personal, I'd be happy to hear how you know when you're done.
So when there's something that doesn't quite feel right, that doesn't make sense to me, I'll definitely triangulate the data. I'll look for at least three different sources that have different viewpoints. It's getting harder and harder. There was a story recently, and I really, by the end of it, I couldn't still quite figure out what the answer was, because what I've noticed is that sometimes what articles will say is that according to this other source, it's like, well, wait a minute, if you're just saying that according to this other source, you haven't verified yourself, then what exactly are you saying? So it's difficult. But I definitely try to get various opinions. That's why like an application like Brown News or even All Sides, I'll force myself to read things that I may not agree with, or even is already like I can feel is going against my confirmation bias. It's just kind of getting through that discomfort of breaking through your own confirmation bias. Then when I kind of feel like, okay, I would take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and what's the real issue? How do you peel it down to some of the core issues? That's when I know I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
I saw that George looked like you had a question. So George, you want to go and then Ron? I think we'll close.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Stephanie, thanks. I thought the documentary was excellent. I appreciated the variety of people who you spoke with. I was also impressed with a lot of the people in the street interviews. they seem to be pretty savvy when it comes to their reasons for mistrusting the media, the news media. I think it's a real challenge to navigate the news. Scott Pelley also once said, in answer to the question that you just answered, how do you find trustworthy news? And he said, well, you triangulate it. You look at three different sources, or three or more sources. A lot of people don't have the time or the energy to be able to do that. So just a quick plug. I've created a website called The American Leader that tries to help people navigate the news. But my question for you is, what's next? You invested a lot of time, and I think I heard you say your own money in this. And I'd be curious to know what's on your mind for your next move.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I think I'm trying to get it out on distribution in early spring, but I'm just going to continue to travel around the country and try to get it seen by, get as many conversations going as I can between now and the next election. I'm just kind of committed to that. The film so far has had a lot of really great response, and so I'm just going to continue to run with it.
Good luck.
Thanks.
I guess more of the same, but get it further out there. Let's run.
Yeah, my question is about fact checking. There's a lot of different fact checking tools out there. One, to you, Stephanie, what do you use? And are there any in the audience, dwell on this, any effective fact checking tools that you use to check anything from debates by the politicians to all types of sources in the media? So that's my question. Fact checking, basically. How do you check it?
Yeah, again, mine's kind of the same thing that the triangulation rule. If it needs more than three, I do try to only go to sources that are at least known to be, reputable to begin with. Even if they have some differing ways that they communicate things. I'm pretty analytical, my background in finance and systems.
Okay.
I'm pretty analytical, so I can kind of take in a lot of facts at one time. But it's mostly just, there's facts, which is something that, because we did have the discussion when we were on the bus tour about the difference between truth and fact. And so, if you're limited to a certain amount of information, that is your truth. Now, whether or not it's a fact or not is a different thing, but your truth is what you've been exposed to. If I told half of you my name was Roxanne and half of you my name was Zelda, that would be your truth, even if it's not even a fact.
Okay.
Now, what's the fact? The fact is what's the name on my my ID, my government issued ID. That's the fact. So really understanding what are people's feelings, what have they verified themselves. That's where the closer you get to journalists, instead of people just, expressing their opinion, journalists are more going to be a little closer to fact-based rather than feeling-based.
So I guess what I meant on that question, I probably posed it the wrong way.
Okay.
There are fact checker tools out there. And how do you know they are telling the truth? Because a lot of times they're connected to a certain corporation or a news media, and they give out, because, they might list it as a conservative, liberal, libertarian, that viewpoint. And so that's my thing on that. But,
so I guess I've never used, I don't think I've actually used what's called a fact checker tool, other than if I look up, if a statistic is cited, then I'll go to the source of the statistic.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
That's going all the way to the source of where it came from.
All right.
Jet, go for it. And I think we'll just take one or two more so we can get to the usual group discussion. So Jet, you go for it. And then I guess, Chris, have you gone yet already? He's gone. He took his hand down. I think we'll do Jet and then Bob, and then others are welcome to put your questions in the chat. How about that? Okay, Jet, go for it.
Yeah, Stephanie, I thought the documentary was just excellent. I thought it was outstanding.
Okay.
Okay. I have three questions, very quick ones. Number one, since from the beginning of how you thought about making this video to the completion, how long did it take to do it? Number one. Number two, approximate budget, how much did it cost you to do this? And at the end of the filming, did you come to some conclusion as to what may be the root cause of our polarization? Whether it's the root cause because of misinformation by different media, or it's because different people have a different ideology? You know, what may be the conclusive root cause if you came to any kind of conclusion? So those are my three questions. Thanks.
Okay. So we started filming in October of 2021, and we were done with production in November of, we were done producing the film in November of 2022. So that's pretty fast by most standards.
Good, very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, you know, the time we greenlit it was even just July 2021. So it's pretty fast. The total budget of the film that was put into it, about $1 million. But again,
Okay, wow.
yeah, the music was a big thing. And, you know, when you come from startup backgrounds, you know, there's always like, it's either time or money, you know, what's speed to market.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
you can either, and what you can have like two, cheap, fast, or good. You can have 2 out of the 3. And I wanted fast and good. So, and then my mom, who I've mentioned on the website, I lost her during COVID, but she always was okay because, you know, when I'm contributing to the job machine, you know, it felt really good coming out of COVID to put a lot of people to work. So it's all well spent, even if it was, yes, it is quite a big budget for a documentary.
How about the root cause? Did you come to some conclusion what maybe
Yeah,
the root
so this answer might be a little bit uncomfortable, but, you know, sometimes I'll ask, you know, what's the main cause of division? Is it, you know, is it media? Is it our government? Or is it ourselves? And, you know, the combination of those 3 together is definitely a pretty perfect storm. But, you know, this particular war, if you will, is on our minds. And that's where we really have to, but this is where we, you know, this is our own territory. We can control this. We have a lot of power to solve some of these issues, but it's hard. Like when we're just being triggered all the time, you know, fight, flight, freeze, appease, whatever. Outrage is not a lifestyle. You know, you can't really go to problem solving from that. You know, outrage is supposed to just be a momentary thing you feel that inspires you to act, not a way that you have to live your day every day. So them coming at, you know, all this coming at us the way it is, and then you throw in some algorithms and you throw in, oh, I'm taking this out on the people around me. You know, these are some, we have to really just try to check ourselves and not get too sucked into whoever is, why they're doing this. Is it really about a buck? That really makes me mad. Is there some other nefarious, you know, I don't know, but I just, you know, I'm going to stop it right here. Right.
So are you saying root cause is us, we?
Yeah.
Wow. How do you solve that problem?
We have to, you know, things like this, you know, we get together, we reach out, we listen to other opinions, you know, exactly what I'm seeing people do all across the country is try to make it better. How do we, you know, how do we tell the providers what we want from them, what we expect? How do we guide our children to use social media as some intermittent entertainment, you know, not something that they're really addicted to? So it does take a lot of work. This didn't happen overnight, but we, you know, we have some, you know, and the reason that answer is okay, because that gives us power to do something about it. You know,
so your next film has to be what we have to do and how do we go about doing it to solve this problem? Thank you.
Thanks for the idea, Jet. Maybe you can get it. Okay, last question from Bob. I will invite Al and Bill because I love to hear from all of you, but we want to move on after Bob goes for time's sake to the group questions, because we always have, you know, about an hour and a half, and tonight it'll be not quite an hour to do questions from the groups. So feel free to put questions in the chat, and Bob, go for it.
and this is a question I actually put in the chat, but I wanted to follow on with it, so I raised my hand as well. Stephanie, have you watched the sessions from the Braver Angels National Convention about the media and the concept of outrage entrepreneurs?
No, not yet. I just got introduced to Braver Angels like in the last 60 days. So I'm trying to catch up. I was traveling for 5 weeks,
That's okay.
but I'm
You
very,
can't do everything, and you've been a busy lady, so that's good. I would recommend them. I thought
Yes,
they were very
yes.
good.
No, I
And
wanna
the
immerse.
term outrage entrepreneurs I've used several times, and it seems to resonate with some of the things that you just said. The second thing is back in 2019, and this is what I put in the chat several ago, the Society of Professional Journalists in 2019, after the Trump election, and they felt blindsided, they said, how could this have happened? You know, how were we so off base with our prognostications? They did this thing called the Casper Project. And are you familiar with it?
No,
Okay. And so the reason they picked Casper, Wyoming was that it was it had the lowest, the state of Wyoming had the lowest media trust of any state in the nation. And they said, all right, let's go in. And they brought in representatives from Wall Street Journal and some of the other, it might have been the Post or the Times, whatever. And they brought in several along with some that were not so prominent. And they looked at that and they said, what can we do to win back our audience? And so I just recommend you take a look at it. Some of the challenge was, as people that are consuming the news, like I used to read The Economist very regularly. I just read it every time it came in, and then I saw it just didn't. They're on the ground reporting about what I was seeing on the ground here in Wyoming, and their characterization of it didn't match. And so I ended up canceling my subscription because how can I trust them if I thought I was reading articles from on the ground reporting in India and Brazil. And so I ended up canceling that. I kept the Wall Street Journal, even though they're not perfect, but some of the other ones, it just struck me that we can't blame it all on us. There's some media issues there too. And as a note of hope, I just wanted to say, I really appreciated your emphasis on the local news. And about a month ago, our local newspaper,
Excuse me, Bob.
would write
Excuse
in
me,
about,
Bob.
yeah.
Excuse me, Bob.
Mhm.
Because of time, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to move on and maybe,
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Bob.
yeah. I'd love for you to reach out afterwards if you want to follow
Thank you,
up on that.
Bob, for the ideas, and thanks, Stephanie, for such good answers. And you kept them very concise, which is not always the case. So thank you. Appreciate that too. So like I said, I want to invite Alan Bill to put your questions in the chat. And also, Stephanie, if you're up for it and can do it while we're in the group discussion, you're also invited, welcome to answer a couple questions that people wrote up above. I believe there was one from Lynn about reputable sources in triangulation and Fox. That was you can look up above at the questions. People wrote one also about deepfake, about the deepfake videos. So we are going to move on to the discussion. Sorry, we can't get to everyone, but we do have, a bunch of questions we want to get to. And I'm going to invite Ivan to start us out with the regular group discussion tonight.
All right. Thanks, Molly. And thanks again, Stephanie. It's always a treat to get someone from the film to talk. But this time it's all about you participants. And we'll start with the usual opener. What did you think about this film? And I invite especially people who haven't spoken already. Bill, what did you think?
Overall, I like the film. I think Stephanie said that in the future, if anybody views the film, she'd appreciate feedback on it. So I thought this would be an opportunity to provide some feedback. I think one of the things you said today, Stephanie, was that you thought maybe of putting Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson side by side, but then you got rid of that idea because you didn't want too much grr in the film. And I actually would have liked a little more grr in the film. You interviewed a lot of people who said, the title of the film is Trustworthy, and you interviewed a lot of people who said, I don't know what to believe, I don't know who to believe. But these were all mild-mannered people. It would have been nice if the people had reflected what's really going on in this country. We have a lot of mild-mannered people, but we have a lot of fire-breathing people too. So I would have liked to see a few of the what I'll call lefters and left-wingers and right-wingers and fire-breathers to even out the film to reflect what we actually feel in society, as opposed to just the people who are mild-mannered.
Well, thanks for that, Bill. Let's move to Trudy. What did you think about the film?
Well, Stephanie, I have to take my hat off to you. I'm not wearing one, but I'll pretend. I am with my local League of Women Voters, and I am in the process of putting a presentation together called Truth Decay. And I'm rolling that out to a lot of different groups. And so your film was really quite invaluable to me. And I got information that I couldn't find online. And then I also, I guess the best thing you did was turn me on to some YouTube videos. So I'm really, really thrilled, and a lot of information there that I can roll into my presentations. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trudy. Anybody else for general comments or feedback? Oh, Alan.
Thank you. Yeah, two things. First, my comment on the film itself. I really enjoyed the film. Cinematography was great. The music was appropriate. The people were so honest. It was just, you got their feelings right out there. And some of the cameos or some of the snapshots of the people showed how beautiful people really can be. So that was just heartwarming. One other comment, I posted something here about from what I call Falk's laws, one of which is the truth is whatever you believe to be the truth. So I think, Stephanie, you may have fun chomping on that one. But when the previous gentleman who said that he canceled his subscription to The Economist struck a note with me, because I have a fair number of subscriptions like that, but there are only 2 magazines, maybe 3 or 4, including astronomy, but there's only basically 2 political economic magazines that I read cover to cover in darn near every article. One is The Economist, and the other is Reason magazine. And you have extremely right-wing and a very noticeably left-wing version in the two, between the 2 different covers. The Economist pretends to be fair-minded and equal everything, but if, as a free market capitalist, I can read between the lines of what they say, and there's always a little innuendo that says, yeah, capitalism's bad, and making money is not good, and there are better ways to do things, so let's not do that. So it gets to be annoying. And Reason is the other end of the spectrum. So, and they both have evidence and reports that I wouldn't normally choose, but The Economist is just priceless, because it whether they're accurate or not in terms of truth, they cover pretty much the whole world, and it's a view that I would find it really hard to get anywhere else. So just want to say that. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Alan. I'll move on to another question. Talk about citizen journalists. We've also heard the term independent journalists come up in this discussion. But how does the emergence of citizen journalists who report on social media without training in journalism, how does that affect the quality and trust in the media? Do they help or hurt the public? What do you think? Steve.
Yeah, I think they can do both, and to me it's just like any organization. I don't think organizations that grew their brand and built their credibility over generations deserve to keep that credibility when they get things wrong and don't correct their errors. And by the same token, if somebody who is small and has almost no voice but has a perspective and can bring new information to the table and corrects their errors, they deserve their credibility to be built. It's all about the process and in the honesty that that an individual is willing to bring to their product. Someone like Richie McGinnis from the Daily Caller, who was on the ground in Kenosha and brought the entire Rittenhouse story that nobody else covered, is incredibly valuable. That guy, I would listen to almost anything he has to say because he gave such an honest depiction, and he just brought the information. He didn't editorialize. He freely admits where the limits of his knowledge are. He doesn't try to puff himself up. So someone like that gains credibility in my eyes when somebody does not apologize for egregious failure, which has happened over and over again in the last 6-7 years. Those people deserve to lose credibility no matter how big their institution is. So it's about the process.
Okay, good point. Chuck, how about you? Chuck, are you still there? Can you unmute? Well, going once. How about Helena?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I completely agree with a lot with what Steve said about owning up to when you make a mistake. I mean, that's so important. I mean, if you just think of, with your friends or anything, when somebody doesn't say, hey, or you don't admit that you made a mistake, I mean, you just lose your credibility. The other thing I want to say, because I really do enjoy independent journalists, is kind of analogy to is the cell phone and what the cell phone has done with taking, people on the street will take a picture that will create a story. Like that is something that actually happened that before wouldn't even be recounted in the news. So how important the cell phone has been, and sort of an analogy of, they're like reporters who will report on something that nobody else knows, but they actually have seen something. And I just think it's really important to get a lot of different points of view and to really, say, hey, I made a mistake or I was wrong. And when someone doesn't say that, it's like they lose my trust completely.
Right. Thanks for that. Stephanie, did you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I was going to say, so some of the things I've talked about with some of the journalists that were in the film is that, how do they communicate more transparency about their process? That's why I think that some of the independent journalists can share what is their process for collecting the information they have. And then the other thing is that, I can tell when I'm reading a story that does have both sides of the story. And so that's how you really establish a lot too, and not just calling out one side or the other, just being a little more, there's a way to be a little more respectful in reporting than I see some journalists being. And that's what's going to make it feel a little more digestible, that there's, a variance on the opinion and then some transparency to the process.
Yeah, thanks. And George, how about you?
Yeah, thanks. I think some of this also can, the trust can center around the language that gets used. And often I think it's the independent journalists who maybe get ahead of the mainstream journalists in terms of using correct language to more accurately and precisely describe events and the people involved. And I'll give you an example. You've got a number of people in the House of Representatives who have openly espoused Christian nationalist positions, and yet they continue to be called conservatives. Liz Cheney will be the first to tell you they are not conservatives. They've abandoned the conservative belief in the Constitution, and the media will continue, because the newsmaker calls themselves a conservative. The media will continue to use that term rather than using the more accurate term of Christian nationalist when they refer to them.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Alan, let's have you close out this question.
Thank you. I'll try. I think this will be kind of quick. Regarding the lady who talked about people not owning up to when they made a mistake, I had the observation for the last couple of decades that I've never heard a politician ever apologize for having made a really documented mistake. If you find one, bronze them or something like that. Next is fact checkers. And it has to do with like when Snopes lost a tremendous amount of respect because they never found anything wrong with Trump's opponent, and they always found something wrong with Trump. It has total thread right through the whole thing. So fact checkers you can lose respect for them pretty easily too. And I had a short anecdote story about that. I got bounced out of Facebook, put on hold for a couple, 3 days, because they claimed that one of my posts was a link to something which was not factually substantiated. And so it took me a while to figure out what it was. And I finally figured, they don't tell you what it was. Okay, so I finally figured out what it was. The link that they objected to, because it wasn't really demonstratively true, was a link I had included in a comment, which went to a posting by the Babylon Bee.
Huh.
Chew on that for a while, okay? Facebook said I was quoting something that wasn't factual because I linked to the Babylon Bee. So I ripped them a new one on that one and have never let them forget about it. Just want to say those.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trudy, I was going to move on, but if you have a quick one, let's make you the last, and
I
I'll
have
have
a
to
very
move
quick
on.
one for Stephanie. I wanted to know, maybe she's on a break. I wanted to know what her goal, oh, hi. I want to know what your goal was in making this documentary, given that you spent a whole lot of money doing so, and how will you know if that is realized or when that is realized?
Yeah, so my goal is that anybody who watches it will just do something differently as a result of watching it. There's a lot of different things that can be done, even if it's, check in on your confirmation bias, increase your critical thinking skills. I really have no way of knowing, if I'll achieve my goals, other than I'm just going to show it to as many people as I can. And I suppose at some mass number, I'll assume that there's some impact. So I'm working my way to that number.
All right. Well, thanks for that. Barry, I see your hand is up, but we really got to move on this one.
All right, listen, this is such a hi, everybody. I've been a journalist for most of my professional life. I still do some of that. I also am a crossing guard occasionally. I appreciate it. There's such a vast subject in terms of how journalism should contribute to democracy and be a force for good. Stephanie, I appreciate what you said about outrage is something you might should feel in the moment, but doesn't have to drive your everyday moment of living. It's supposed to move you to try to do things to make the world better. A couple of points about journalism. This is not intended just as a defense. One is journalists make mistakes. The best journalists in the world who have great reputations will occasionally make mistakes, whatever perspective you think they're bringing. In every profession, people make mistakes. I would contend that journalists, by and large, are working as hard as anyone to correct mistakes in society and make wrongs right than in many other professions, or at least no less so than just about every other line of work. Secondly, politicians love to blame journalists and the media. It's pretty much something they've done at least for 250 some odd years in this country, and that won't stop. Blaming the media for everything that somebody in power does not like is no way to make the world better, even though sometimes journalists are wrong, are biased, and get it wrong. So consider the source, including when people in power are talking and pointing their fingers at the media. Last point, big point. Stephanie said this, look at multiple sources. you know, I am prone to focus on one or two or three sources. It's a busy world. We're all overwhelmed. And one of the things about the film that kept striking me, and I know this was intentional, Stephanie, is that, you know, you had a lot of people saying, we don't know who to trust. We don't know what's the fact. The media is always doing this and that. It's an overwhelming universe of information. Throw in social media and no one can possibly master every detail of everything. But don't assume that everybody out there is trying to come at you with bias, with prejudgment. I can tell you, because I've been close to some really big whopper mistakes that I've seen or been exposed to in my professional life, the vast majority of journalists, most of them have very high integrity. I'm not trying to talk about range of spectrum here. No less integrity, I guarantee you, than people in most or many other professions. And if not for journalists trying to uncover wrongdoing in other professions, there would be a lot less wrongdoing and trouble uncovered. So yes, journalists are flawed. They're people too, but they do a lot of good. And so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
All right. Thanks for that positive note. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ron.
Yeah. And coming in on a positive side, just a quick reminder to limit your words to 2 minutes. And if Sugar Bear, which is me, comes on, I'm going to politely, sweetly remind you of that because we have a large audience. So thank you, though. This is a great turnout. So my question is, what sources of news distrust do you think are most important? And some examples like the creep of entertainment or production advertising into news programming, or echo chambers, or fragmentation of news audience into homogeneous things like echo chambers again, the loss of local news media, et cetera, et cetera. So if I need what sources of news distrust do you think are most important? So anyway, who would like to answer that question? Bill. Okay, go for it, Bill.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the most important, but I do think it is important.
Yeah.
Which is when a very important, powerful politician coins a little jingle phrase, such as fake news. It gives people a handle that they could just swing around like a baseball bat. Oh, that's fake news. Oh, that's fake news. Oh, that's fake news. I think we reached an inflection point when that phrase became popular. That places like the New York Times are called fake news. Well, I mean, if there's anything that's reputable, it's the New York Times. So that's my answer. One of the things is that little jingle, fake news.
Okay. So you're saying the media latches onto that, or the individual in his speech with his First Amendment rights, he said that. Is that what you're saying? I mean, I'm trying to figure.
To be very blunt, the president of the United States coined that phrase and started throwing it around.
Okay. And so that meant in his free speech. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Ross, how about you? What about on that question?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to approach the idea of distrust, and maybe Stephanie or you yourself or someone can tell me if they think it's all wet or not. I don't think trust and distrust are an equal balance. I think, and I also think they're separable, distinguishable. I may be able to trust a friend with my wallet, but I can't trust him to show up on time. The other thing is one or two instances of faithless acts can wipe out several instances of trustworthy acts, but the reverse doesn't necessarily go. And hence we have little phrases like fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So I think that is part of this trust equation. Someone finds where a particular news organization made a mistake in their opinion, put out something that wasn't true, they may discount the entire organization from that, just from that one incident.
I guess,
Any
yeah.
comments on that?
Well, my comment would be immediately what I think of is maybe we need to have more intellectual humanity.
Okay.
And yeah, you know, I mean, because we say things out of I words, we say they. And maybe we just continue saying, I believe, but I'm not sure if it's true. You understand what I'm saying? Because
Right.
I don't have absolute truth. And a lot of times people talk in those narratives like that, but that's my perspective. Because I can't read anyone's mind. Boy, if I could, I'd be in Vegas every night, you know. So that's my perspective on it. So if anyone else later on want to chime in on it, they can't raise their hand. But that's a good question, Ross. Thank you for posing that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You know, John.
Stephanie, do you have something to say on that?
Oh yeah.
So I think I did, yeah. So what I was
The basic
thinking is,
idea is distrust and trust are not in balance. One
right.
incident's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, like I said, it's very easy to lose trust. It's very hard to gain it. And there's been, I think, a little bit of a slippage, if you will, and just the concept of integrity, the concept of, you know, accountability. These are things that seem to be waning, in my opinion. And I think the most accountable person is that someone who does admit that when they made a mistake. That's like someone who admits a hard thing. I'll trust them more. You know, if someone can admit when they made a mistake, I'll trust them more than someone who said that they do everything correctly. Even if they do everything correctly, because then you just never really know. So that's, again, you know, what's fact, trust. These are things I think we need to work harder on. You know, how do you know? Did you really know when you lie? You know, I've asked that question before and everyone agrees. Yeah, you know when you lie. Well, so what's with all the lying? You know, it's just really trying to kind of up our own integrity for ourselves and each other. I think we have to kind of do it from that standpoint. I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's what I was thinking when I was listening to you.
All right. Thank you very much. John D. And there you go.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can, loud and clear.
Okay, great. So I think there are two major things that are causing problems with the media trust. And I think that one of them is an incredible amount of source selection bias by different sources. So basically the news on the left reports one set of stories, the news on the right reports another set of stories. And so people who are listening mostly to the news on the left think the world has one set of problems, and people who are listening to the news on the right think they have a completely different set of problems, and they just don't hear the same stories. I think that's one key problem. And I think the other one is the loss of factuality in news reporting. So there are several sources, both on the left and the right, although I have found a pattern when studying the third-party analysis of news sources that at the local level, there's actually reasonable factuality and a reasonable mix of factuality of sources. At the national level, there's considerably higher statistical factuality on the national left sources than there are national right sources. And I suspect that maybe because the audience is more accepting of not fact checking the sources. I'm not actually entirely certain why that is, but regardless, the loss of a basic expectation of factuality, I think, is the other major source. Actually, I think there's one other reason why that might have happened, and that is I think that most of the national sources on the left come from a journalistic background, and so they learned the idea of fact checking and the idea of correcting your errors, whereas I suspect that some of the major sources on the right, national sources, excuse me, specifically on the right, came from some other backgrounds besides journalism. And as a result, that's not as high a priority for them.
Thank you. Wow. You know, man, that was a mouthful, but thank you. Bill, how about you?
Okay. Well, I think I have maybe one point to make, and that is, you know, when I try to listen and interpret the news, I think it can be helpful And by way of explanation, I had a buddy who was an artist, and when he looked at his artwork, he'd look at it in the mirror. He'd try to get a different perspective on it. And so when I listen to the news, I think, how can I change what I'm hearing by changing some of the people? If it's making some changes in this scenario so that I have to look at it from a new perspective or a different light. And I think that can help in terms of knowing when there's bias in the media or when there's something that needs to be thought about from a different fashion.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I was thinking like, how do you do that though? But anyway,
How do you look in a mirror at a piece of art?
Well, yeah, a piece of art.
Well, you do the same thing if you have a story about Donald Trump saying something. Well, how would you feel if someone else said it? John McCain, or
I got you. I got you.
Just put a different person in that place, saying something similar.
Use IA, what Stephanie said. Use a IA person. Yeah, that'll be interesting. All right, thank you. Steve.
I want to boil the answer to this question down for me in 2 words: horse paced.
Oh.
There was a lie, and it wasn't a big lie. It was a small and stupid lie that made its way through a large chunk of media that ivermectin was horse paced, even though it is one of the safest and most heavily prescribed human medicines in the world. Whenever it was brought up in terms of a human trying it for COVID mitigation, the media described it as horse paced. That was such an objectionable, stupid, and belittling lie that it made millions of people just really mad at the media. And I don't know who exactly used horse paced as a term and who did not. The fact that those people were not yanked from the air by their editors and said, do not use that belittling term, pretending that the people who are watching your show are idiots and cannot look up for themselves as to whether ivermectin is horse medicine or not. Do not treat us like idiots.
Yeah.
That, in a nutshell, is the cost of the media's credibility. Right there.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Next will be Helena. How about you? Yeah.
Okay, coming back right on Steve, because the thing is, it's like you can say, for example, I had the same reaction because there are medications that animals use and humans use. So I don't know, anti-inflammatory, whatever. So you don't say that, if you're taking an anti-inflammatory, that is a cat medicine. It's just, it's for humans too. What I also wanted to say is, for me, is the language is so important, is, not like demonizing another side. It just seems to me that there's like a narrative that some of these news shows have about a particular subject. And so they just find facts that will just confirm their narrative instead of looking at the whole picture. And it becomes blatantly obvious. And it's just like demeaning, like you have, the Republicans are all horrible and they're stupid. And then, the Democrats are, they're just, full of themselves. And just words that basically lose my, it just makes me not want to listen. It's like they're trying to inflame, they're trying to create an emotional reaction rather than actually tell me the news.
Thank you. Jet, and that'll be the last one on that one, and then I'll go to the next question.
Yeah, so my comment is based on what Alan Falk from Raleigh, North Carolina sent note to everybody. He said the truth is whatever you believe to be the truth. So I think he has some value comment there because, we're all trying to figure out, who's telling the truth, fact check. What is the fact? Which is most reliable factual news source, we think. But at the end of the day, is each one of us gravitate to what we think is the truth? So are we asking the wrong question? Are we searching the wrong way? Because at the end of the day, it's us. And as Stephanie said, it's us. We have the power. We are seeking the truth, what we think. We gravitate to what we think is the truth. So how do we solve this issue? Are we asking the wrong question? We should be really examining each one of us as to, hey, what is the truth and how do we all come together as what the truth is? That's just the question I'm putting out to the table.
Okay. And so you can try to answer that question in the chat. And but thank you for that, Jet. Thank you very much. How are we doing, Donna? Should I go to the next question or should I go another host or?
Yeah, please go to the next question.
Okay. So this question is about misinformation. And it's like, how would you characterize misinformation and what influence does media bias exert in propagating it? Okay. How would you characterize misinformation? Give me like one or two examples of misinformation. Anyone? I think we've touched on a little bit on it tonight, but anyone want to tackle that hasn't spoken? Okay, Mr. Allen.
Oh, I've spoken already, but thank you for, not.
That's okay. That's okay. You're the only hand up, so.
That wasn't cheating, but anyway, the question in the chat that mentioned NPR struck me because I used to be a major contributor to APR, NPR, whoever they were, like the classical music and whatever. But in the last 5 or 10 years, I realized that whenever, and again, free market capitalist here, so it's my trigger words when you talk about economics and, that kind of stuff. I realized that whenever anyone on NPR, pretty much anyone, I'll generalize it down a little bit, frequently when an NPR commentator was interviewing someone on any subject, but specifically things that involved economics, they would try to corner the person into answering in such a way that had a non-free market answer as the approved answer, the one that we're looking for. And it just got to be so irritating. I just stopped donating everything to them. And I think that happens a lot. One other neat example.
So Alan, what classification would you put that in? What would you, give me a couple of words that you would put that in?
Deliberate manipulation.
Okay. All right. I can work with that.
Along the same kind of lines, whenever I've heard the commentators, whether they're talking about the Macy's parade or whatever, but specifically when they're talking about some kind of catastrophe or world-changing event, they will not so much talk about the event or the facts or what happened. They will focus on, okay, you were there and it hurt you or you lost a loved one. How do you feel about that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how they feel about that has no impact on me at all, ever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I can feel empathy, I can have sympathy, but their feelings have nothing to do with what happened, why it happened, how we could prevent it from happening in the future if we wanted to try.
So
and
Alan,
that's manipulation too.
So Alan, you're saying they put it in emotional point, an example. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to Chris, but thank you very much, Alan. Thank you. Chris.
I think a big issue with the whole misinformation and the whole the caustic nature of the media space that we're in right now is it fulfills a need. people are listening to this stuff because it gratifies them. That's because like people are not happy. If you go back like 30, 40, 50 years, a large swaths of the American populace were in a much more stably, like financially stable situation. So if you look at now the stories that people are listening to, it's like things are bad. Things could get worse or better, but let me validate how you feel and then give you a solution. It might not actually be a solution, but I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, right? I don't think people ever don't want to hear what they want to hear. I think the difference now is that people are in a materially worse situation, which means that the stakes are heightened. And so the narrative is necessarily more confrontational because people feel like they have more to lose, or maybe less to lose, but they're in a worse position.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for your perspective. Okay, good. Bill, and then Bruno. That'll be the final on this question.
Try to keep it a little short, friends, just because we're going to try to get in one or two more questions before we run out of time. Yeah.
Right. So I don't remember the exact wording of your question, but I think it had something to do with how do you recognize false news?
Yeah. How would you characterize misinformation? How would you?
So,
what would you?
Yeah. So you know, during the daytime when I'm at home, I'm retired, so I'll check CNN.com, which is left leaning. But when I'm out on the road and driving around, I'm going to put on right-wing talk radio to listen to what they have to say. And it's not necessarily the moderator that disturbs me. It's the people who call in, the people who at home who call in. Boy, I got to tell you, some of the stuff that they spout out, it's like,
so Bill,
where do you get where do they get their inside information from?
So what is that? What is that a category? What is?
Well, people tend to listen to their peers.
Okay.
And their peers are spouting off inside information. How do they get it?
So they say it in tribalness words.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I could go with that, Bill. Thank you. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but Bruno, how about you? You're on mute, Bruno. There you go.
I talked to a farmer recently, and he told me a story about how they were cutting back on crop insurance, like crop failure insurance, and we were talking politics in general, and he just couldn't understand. He couldn't wrap his head around why are we supporting Ukraine and we're not supporting our own farmers. And then the interpretation of, I think, mostly left-wing media, which tends to be the major media, tends to be that, well, this guy's just backwards. He doesn't understand what's happening there. We can't just let a democracy disappear because Putin wants them to disappear. So to me, that's a kind of a misrepresentation that I think has brought us to the polarization that we see a lot of, and people's distrust in media. A lot of people just feel like they're not just not represented. They're painted as stupid.
Well, okay. Now, Molly, I think you have the next question, but thank you, Bruno.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for closing that out, Bruno.
Mm-hmm.
I think we definitely have all encountered people, and ourselves have been people who are less informed. And I think the compassion comes in when we think, okay, where can we play a role in, creating a more informed voting community for society? So I wanted to ask this question, which is actually, and I'll just take one or two answers because I want to try to get to one Donna had that's very compelling, but I think this is an important question. I always like to look at what you don't see or what was missed. What are factors you feel weren't discussed in the film, so we're not discussed in the film, that you feel have led to lowering trust, which perhaps you feel, you wish the film had highlighted? And while people take a moment to digest that, again, it's factors you feel weren't discussed. I'm going to give one example, which is that a lot of small town newspapers have been bought out by one large corporation. And you can look this up. I'm not going to share which one. I mean, I don't know it off the top of my head. I don't remember, but basically that means that a lot of small town papers have an inherent national bias and it's going one direction. So that can also lead some people to trust less, perhaps. Chris and then Anne, and try to keep your answers to a minute or a minute and a half, if that's possible. Go for it, Chris. Thank
All right,
you.
I'll be quick.
Yeah, of course.
So I really think like this is just my perspective, of course, but I feel like we are really wringing our hands here when the answer is a lot more simple than we want it to be. Like people just don't care. Like I don't think people really care if they might even know that things are biased, that the narratives are pitched, but they think that it's worth it. People want the drama heightened because they feel like their side winning is more important than the truth. Like they might even know that it's that bad, that they're wrong, but they don't care. So I think that's one of the reasons.
That was powerful. Yeah, maybe people don't really want the less biased view. Okay, and take us away, Anne, and then I guess we'll move on to the last question. Go for it, Anne.
Okay, I was just going to say that there is a professional organization for the Radio, Television, and Digital News Association, which has all the major news organizations belong to it. I mean, the radio, television, digital news. And they have a code of ethics. And it seems like, it's just a very little known fact, and that they could be doing more to, punish and reward the members for, upholding the ethics.
Sorry, that's a really interesting one I didn't know about. Anne, would you mind writing that in the chat so we can look up more?
Okay.
Awesome, thank you.
Be happy
and
to.
I'm going to have Donna close out with the last question. We have just about 3 minutes left, and then after Donna, your question we'll end with our usual announcement of the next film and so on, and talk about BA. But Donna, take us away with the end here.
Thank you, Molly. So going to solutions. Does anyone on this call use resources designated to help navigate media bias and expand their own viewpoints, such as Ground News, Univision's The Lie Detector, All Sides, The Flip Side, and others? What's been your experience, and keep your answers very brief, please, just a few people. So does anybody use these? Oh, good. John D., go ahead.
Yeah, so I absolutely do use Ground News, and I use it not just to read the news, but also to search for stories that I'm suspicious about to try to get a broader perspective on that story, as well as finding out about various biases and factuality of different sources, looking up the sources themselves, again, in addition to the stories.
Thank you. We have Trudy in the chat saying alludes Snopes rumor guard. How about you, George?
Thanks. I like to refer people to a guide on the American Press Institute site that talks about bias and objectivity. And their point is bias is not always a bad thing. Bias is a good thing. We all have bias. And it's a place to begin the conversation. So I'll get that link and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. And Bill, why don't you close us out on this?
Yeah, I'll keep it nice and short. I subscribe to Flipside, but all I do is skim, and that's good enough for me.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And now our final two leaders. First is going to be Ron. You want to tell us about Braver Angels, and then Ivan's going to tell us what our next selection will be for January.
Yeah, hopefully tonight, you really, when you go home tonight, and you really think about tonight's discussion, I know I will, about, first of all, what Stephanie said. What is our role? What is our role with media? And then think about also how you can join us here at Braver Angels with our mission of perspective allowing everyone to voice their opinion, as long as it's civil, in a manner that we as Americans, I'm gonna have to say this, used to have. How can we get on that boat and make this civil, this movement grow? Now, those of you who are currently members, you already are aware of this. Just go to braveangels.org, get involved. It's only $1 a month. Okay? And tell your friends about the film club. Tell your friends about everything that Brave Angels does. And tonight was a wonderful example of how all Americans can give their spiel, their perspective, and hopefully you come away with some positive, what I call a positive mental attitude about how we can help build this country. So for our co-leaders and everyone, boy, my nickname is Sugar Bear, and I am very sweet on everyone here. Thank you for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure, like all the time. So anyway, we'll move to the, who is that? Molly?
Ivan, Ivan, you want to announce the next film?
Yeah. For everybody, we touched upon this real briefly in the discussion tonight, but the next film in January is going to be about Christian nationalism. The title is kind of long, Democracy and Faith Under Siege, Responding to Christian Nationalism. So we're going to really touch that hot topic. We haven't nailed down the date, but it will be sometime probably in mid-January. Look for it on the Braver Angels website, on the film club. And we'll see you all there.